Welcome and thank you for standing by. For the duration of today's conference, all parties will be in listen-only mode until the question-answer session of the conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Michael Cook. Thank you. You may begin.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually today for the 2020 Demographic Analysis Population Estimates News Conference. I am Michael Cook, the Chief of the Public Information Office. Today's briefing has been convened to share the results of the 2020 Demographic Analysis Population Estimates. Today, I'd like to welcome from the U.S. Census Bureau, in order of their appearance, Dr. Ron Jarman, our Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Eric Jensen, Senior Technical Expert for Demographic Analysis, Population Division, and Dr. Victoria Velkoff, Associate Director for Demographic Programs. I'd also like to extend a special welcome and thanks to the following demographers from outside the Census Bureau who have kindly joined us today. Dr. Carolyn Liebler, Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Jeff Passell, Senior Demographer, Pew Research Center, and Dr. Elizabeth Arias, Statistical Analysis and Research Team Leader at the Mortality Statistics Branch at the National Center for Health Statistics. And wrapping up today's news conference will be Karen Battle, Division Chief for our Population Division at the U.S. Census Bureau. Demographic analysis is a method the Census Bureau uses to estimate the size of the nation. It provides a range of estimates for the nation's population and a limited set of demographic groups as of April 1st, 2020. You may notice that this is the same reference date we use for the decennial census, but it's important to note that these results do not come from nor are informed in any way by the 2020 census. In fact, these estimates come from our Population Estimates Program, which has been producing these national population estimates since 1960. Our mission at the U.S. Census Bureau is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about our people and economy, and we are committed to providing quality statistics that help measure our nation. These demographic population estimates released today will be used to evaluate the quality of our 2020 census results, and they have served as a comparable measure to census counts each decade since they were first produced in 1960. I've only provided you with a glimpse of what you'll hear on our demographic analysis team today. These experts are here today, and I encourage you to visit census.gov, where you can access information from today's press conference by clicking on the Demographic Analysis Press Kit. So, after we provide updates, we'll open the phone lines for questions from accredited media. Please be prepared to provide the operator with your name and media outlet. I'd like now to welcome Dr. Ron Jarman, our Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Census Bureau. Ron?
Thank you, Michael. Today, we are excited to release the Demographic Analysis Estimates for April 1st, 2020. Like Michael said, demographic analysis is not the 2020 census count. Demographic analysis are an independent way the Census Bureau estimates the nation's population. Demographic analysis uses administrative records and other data to build an estimate of the U.S. population. We also factor in margins of error, if you will, to produce low, middle, and high estimates. Eric Jensen will dig deeper into the rigorous formula behind creating demographic analysis, but each theory serves as a plausible estimate of our nation's population as of April 1st of 2020. The 2020 census has faced numerous extraordinary challenges, many resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought our field operations to a halt. Census Bureau staff rallied successfully to complete enumeration, and we have launched into the next major phase of the decennial census of processing and tabulating the responses we began collecting back in January. We have numerous quality checks built into the census, both in collecting and processing the data. We have updated plans for releasing information about quality along with the first results from the census, including releasing an unprecedented number of data quality indicators. We know that data users are eager for this information, and as are we, because of the important role these quality metrics play in telling us how well we did at counting everyone once, only once, and in the right place. With today's release of demographic analysis population estimate, we are able to provide the public with its first major metric that will give us an early indication of the quality behind the 2020 population count. The post-enumeration survey, which will begin to be available next November, is another data set that we will be able to compare to census results to evaluate the quality of the census. Demographic analysis estimates are based on years of extensive ongoing evaluation and collaboration within the Census Bureau and with expert demographers around the nation, including universities, research institutes, and other federal agencies, to continue to refine and improve the methods used to create this rigorous estimate of the nation's population. It's only because of this team's ongoing diligence and hard work that we are proud to release the demographic analysis estimates to you today. I want to emphasize that we deliberately decided to release the demographic analysis to you before the 2020 census counts are available, to stress that they are an independent of the census. They are created entirely without data from or knowledge of the 2020 census. Today's demographic analysis release marks a major milestone in the 2020 census timeline, but we have a lot more work ahead of us as we continue to take a close look at how processes for the 2020 census worked and how effectively different geographic areas and population groups were counted. The Census Bureau will use that information as well as opportunities to innovate over the next decade to prepare for the 2030 census. With that, I'll turn it over now to Eric, who will walk us through the background and the rigorous methodology used to create this decade's demographic analysis population estimates. Eric?
Thanks, Ron. And hello, everyone. I'm Eric Jensen, Senior Technical Expert for Demographic Analysis in the Population Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. As Michael and Ron have begun to explain, demographic analysis, or DA, is a long-standing program that the Census Bureau uses to evaluate the quality of the census. Demographic analysis was first used by the Census Bureau in 1960 and has been used every decade since. Demographic analysis are national estimates of the population on Census Day by demographic detail. The estimates are produced using current and historical vital records, data on international migration, and Medicare records. The Census Bureau uses the results of the demographic analysis to develop estimates of net coverage error. The DA estimates are compared to the census counts to produce estimates of net coverage error for specific demographic groups at the national level. Net coverage error combines both undercounts and overcounts for the same group. This means that if a group had a large undercount and an equally large overcount, we would show that as a net coverage error of 0. However, groups that are consistently undercounted in the census usually do not have large overcounts too. For example, the college-age population is a group for which we see both undercounts and overcounts, but their net coverage error is positive, meaning overall they are overcounted. Demographic analysis is useful for showing patterns about coverage across demographic groups. We can look at these within a census or across censuses. Demographic analysis has historically been used to highlight coverage differentials by race and also the undercount of young children aged 0 to 4. This graph shows the DA percent net coverage error from 1960 to 2010, which is calculated as the percent difference between the census counts and the DA estimates. In this graph, we see that in 1960, all groups had an undercount, but the undercount for adult black males was much larger than the other groups. Over time, coverage for all groups improved in the decennial census, as you can see with the net coverage error getting closer to 0. For the total population and the non-black population, this undercount even switches to an overcount in 2010. But even then, there's still the large differential between adult black males and other groups. We will share our findings about coverage patterns in the 2020 census after the census results become available, and we're able to use the DA estimates to calculate net coverage error. The methodology used to create the demographic analysis estimates is built upon decades of extensive research and collaboration, both internally and with expert demographers around the nation. This makes it the valuable tool it is today for evaluating coverage of the national population. DA uses the demographic balancing equation, where population equals births minus deaths plus immigration and minus immigration. For the first part of this equation, we use current and historical vital records, birth and death records, from the National Center for Health Statistics. The data on international migration come mostly from the American Community Survey. While we use all these data, the birth records are really the foundation of the DA estimates. We use birth records from 1945 to 2020. We start with the birth records and account for mortality and international migration occurring to that birth cohort between the year of birth and April 1st, 2020. The total estimate for each cohort is calculated by answering two questions. First, who is in the birth records from 1945 to 2020, but not living in the United States on April 1st, 2020? The answer to this question is people who have died or moved abroad. The second question, who is living in the United States on April 1st, 2020, but was not in the birth records? The answer to this question is the foreign-born population, people born abroad of U.S. citizen parents who are now living in the United States, and people who have migrated from Puerto Rico. To help conceptualize the DA method, here's an example. The 1990 to 1991 birth cohort, there were 2.1 million males born in the United States. From 1990 to 2020, there were approximately 68,000 male deaths to that birth cohort. Also, as of April 1st, 2020, we estimate that there were an additional 355,000 males added to that cohort due to international migration. So if you take the births, subtract deaths, and add international migration, we estimate that there should be about 2.4 million males age 29 in the 2020 census. The birth records before 1945 were not as complete as they are today. So we used Medicare enrollment records for the cohorts born before 1945, which is the population age 75 and older on April 1st, 2020. We do make adjustments to the Medicare records to account for people that are ineligible to Medicare, delay enrollment, or never enroll. Finally, to calculate the total population, we add up the estimates for each birth cohort and then add those to the Medicare-based estimates for the older ages. To account for uncertainty in the data and methods that we use, we produce a range of estimates, low series, middle series, and high series. Each of these represents a plausible estimate of the population on April 1st, 2020. The range was developed by varying assumptions about the population components used to produce the estimates. This table shows that roughly 20% of the variation in the estimates came from births and deaths. This makes sense because we have a lot of confidence in the vital records. Nearly half of the variation came from international migration, which again makes sense because the data and methods available to measure international migration are limited. Finally, the Medicare-based estimates accounted for 30% of the difference between the low and high series. The DA estimates are produced at the national level. As we explained earlier, the birth records are the foundation of the DA estimates. The birth records list the state and county where a person was born, but we just don't have the data and methods to place them where they were living on Census Day, April 1st, 2020. For example, I was born in Idaho, and throughout my life, I've lived in several other states. The birth records would put me in Idaho, but how would we track my migration over the life course? There would be a lot of uncertainty in state or county DA estimates if we tried to do them for all ages. We are planning to produce a set of state and county estimates for young children aged 0 to 4. We feel that we can estimate migration for this population with some confidence. These estimates will be produced when the county-level birth data become available in 2022. The DA estimates have historically been produced by two broad race groups, Black and non-Black. We do this because race information on the early vital records is limited to Black and white. Also, the 2020 census included the option of selecting more than one race. which the historical vital records did not. It would introduce much uncertainty into the estimates if we tried to include other race groups. We did produce DA estimates by Hispanic origin for some cohorts. It wasn't until 1990 that all states reported information on Hispanic origin on the birth and death certificates. So we were able to produce DA estimates by Hispanic origin for the population born after 1990, or ages 0 to 29 on April 1st, 2020. We have been working on improving the methods used to create our demographic analysis since we released our last estimates in 2010. Additionally, for 2020, we have increased our collaboration with external experts. Since 2018, we have worked closely with a group made up of demographers from universities, research centers, state governments, and other federal agencies to develop the methods used to produce the 2020 demographic analysis estimates. A few of these research partners will be participating in today's press conference. We are releasing the estimates before the census counts are released, just like we did last decade, to show that they are independent of the 2020 census. And with that, I turn things over to Tori Velkoff, Associate Director for Demographic Programs, who will share the results of the 2020 demographic analysis.
Thanks, Eric. As Eric said, I'm Tori Velkoff, the Associate Director for Demographic Programs, and I'm going to share the results for the 2020 demographic analysis. Today, we are releasing the official 2020 demographic analysis estimates, which were produced at the national level. This includes one set of estimates by age, sex, and the DA race categories, Black alone and non-Black alone. We are also releasing a set of estimates by age, sex, and the DA race categories, Black alone or in combination, and non-Black alone or in combination. These estimates try and reflect that people can self-identify as more than one race. The third set of official estimates we are releasing today is by age, sex, and Hispanic origin. These estimates were only produced for the population aged 0 to 29 on April 1st, 2020, because of when Hispanic origin information became available in the birth and death records. For each set of estimates, we are releasing a range, a low series, a middle series, and a high series. We produced the range to reflect uncertainty in the data and methods used to produce the 2020 DA estimates. Finally, we are releasing the components of population change used to produce all series and all sets. The components include births, deaths, international migration, the armed forces overseas population, and Medicare-based estimates. First, I will present the range of estimates, low, middle, and high, for the total U.S. population as of April 1st, 2020. The 2020 demographic analysis estimates for the total U.S. population on April 1st, 2020 were 330.7 million for the low series, 332.6 million for the middle series, and 335.5 million for the high series. Each of these series represents a plausible estimate of the population on Census Day. Next, I will present the total population by age and sex, which is consistent across all three estimates. This graph shows the total population by age for the different series. For reference, you can see where the millennial and the baby boom generations fall along this graph. The median age of the U.S. population was estimated to be 38.4 years in the low series, 38.5 in the middle series, and 38.7 in the high series. This is a population pyramid for the middle series of the 2020 demographic analysis estimates. This graph shows the age and sex structure of the U.S. population on April 1st, 2020. As you can see, the overall shape of the pyramid is very rectangular, which indicates that we have an aging population. Again, we can see the baby boom generation indicated by the dark band and the millennial cohort indicated by the light band. The sex ratio, or the number of males per 100 females for the total population, was 98 in all three series. Of course, sex ratios vary a lot by age. The sex ratio at birth is typically 105 males per 100 females. After that, it tends to decline because males have higher mortality than females at all ages. However, international migration can also affect the sex ratios. Upon examining the sex ratios across all ages, we verified that we don't see any irregular patterns in the 2020 DA sex ratios. You can see this for yourself. Among our demographic analysis data products, we're excited to include an interactive population pyramid that allows you to compare demographic analysis estimates for April 1st, 2000, 2010, and 2020. You can find this data visualization on census.gov or through the link in the press kit. When we look at the population components, we see that births account for the largest part of the DA estimate. Again, births are the foundation of the DA estimate. International migration is the next largest population component. This includes the foreign-born population, the native population living abroad, the population born abroad of U.S. citizen parents now living in the United States, migrants born in Puerto Rico, and the armed forces overseas population. In the total population, deaths and the Medicare-based estimates contribute almost equally to the total estimate. Most of the variation between the low, middle, and high series comes from the international migration component, which is what we would expect. We have a lot of confidence in the birth and death records, but data and methods used to estimate international migration are more limited. Next, we're going to look at the race patterns in the 2020 DA estimate. As was mentioned earlier, the DA race categories are limited because of what is available in the historical vital records. Two of the sets of estimates released today include race detail. One, the Black alone and non-Black alone, and two, the Black alone or in combination and the non-Black alone or in combination. The Black alone or in combination estimates were controlled to the Black alone, non-Black alone estimates by age and sex, which means the total estimates by age and sex are the same across the two sets of estimates. The difference between these two sets is the distribution of the population by race. The Black alone or in combination estimates are higher than the Black alone estimates because they include the Black multiracial population. We see the greatest difference between the two sets of estimates in the youngest ages, but with age, the Black multiracial population gets much smaller. This next figure shows the Black alone, non-Black alone distribution for the total population and by population component. Because these distributions are very similar across the three series, we chose to only show the middle series here. For the total, the Black alone population accounts for 13.7% of the estimates for the middle series. The Black alone population accounts for 15% of the births and 20% of the deaths, which means that this population has higher birth and death rates than the non-Black alone population. The share of the Black alone population in the international migration and Medicare components is significantly less than its share in the total population. We see similar patterns for the population components for the Black alone or in combination estimates. For these estimates, the Black alone or in combination population accounts for 15% of the total population. And again, we see that for births and deaths, the share is larger than the 15%, but less for the international migration and Medicare. Finally, I'll talk about the Hispanic and non-Hispanic estimates. These estimates were produced by age, sex, and Hispanic origin. They are limited to the population aged 0 to 29 on April 1st, 2020, because Hispanic origin information was not available on all states' birth certificates until 1990. This series was also controlled to the Black alone, non-Black alone estimates by age and sex. Again, we're only able to produce these estimates for the population aged 0 to 29 on April 1st, 2020, based on when Hispanic origin became included on the vital records. The percentage of the population estimated to be Hispanic was 23% in the low series, 24.6% in the middle series, and 26% in the high series. This next graph shows the Hispanic, non-Hispanic distribution for the middle series estimates for the total population and by population component. Remember that these estimates are restricted to the population aged 0 to 29 on April 1st, 2020. The Hispanic population accounts for nearly 25% of the total population estimate. They are less represented in births than deaths and more represented in the international migration component. And this makes sense given that we're only looking at the population under 30, so mortality would not be a big factor. After the census data are finalized, we'll start comparing them to the DA estimates. In 2021, we plan to produce a report with DA net coverage error estimates. Today, we release the official DA estimates, but we will also be working on several experimental sets of DA estimates, which will provide additional evaluations of the quality of the 2020 census. These include expanding the age range for the Hispanic estimates to 39 years, producing a set of estimates that account for people changing how they identify their race over time, estimates with more race and Hispanic origin detail for the population aged 0 to 17, and, as was mentioned already, state and county DA estimates for young children aged 0 to 4. We have an infographic that provides more detail on these experimental sets of estimates, which is available in the press kit. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Velkoff, and thank you, Dr. Jarman and Dr. Jensen. As we've mentioned throughout today's news conference, the Census Bureau relies on collaboration with external experts who have helped us produce the external methods used to produce our decennial analysis estimates. It is with their fundamental support and guidance through the years that has allowed us to get where we are now in producing these estimates. It's our pleasure now to have three of these experts in their respective fields be able to join us today and talk more about our collaboration and the extensive process behind creating this decade's estimates. Dr. Carolyn Liebler, Associate Professor of Sociology, joins us today from the University of Minnesota. Professor Liebler collaborated with the Census Bureau researchers using linked census data to show the substantially more Americans have fluid responses to questions about race than was previously thought. Dr. Jeffrey Passell, Senior Demographer, joins us today from the Pew Research Center, where he is a nationally known expert on immigration to the United States and the demography of racial and ethnic groups. And last, Dr. Elizabeth Arias, Statistical Analyst and Research Team Leader, joins us from our sister agency, the National Center of Health Statistics, where she conducts research on topics within the mortality field, including group disparities, vital and population data quality, and life table methodologies. With that, I'll start by turning it over to Dr. Liebler. Dr. Liebler?
Hello, everyone. I'm Carolyn Liebler. As Michael Cook just mentioned, I'm a sociologist and demographer at the University of Minnesota. Within demography, I specialize in complexities of race and Hispanic ethnicity. For example, as he mentioned, patterns in race response change over time, and studying the child's racial identification in the case of an interracial union. Race and Hispanic ethnicity are complex and personal, yet so important in our society that they have deep implications for health and well-being. You could see this in the demographic estimates we just saw, where Black alone or Black in combination people are experiencing higher levels of birth and death. Because of their social importance, demographers need to take race and Hispanic ethnicity into account, even if the data are incomplete. The DA team has done an excellent job, in my opinion, working with the available data on race and Hispanic ethnicity to its maximum potential. Unfortunately, the older data does not give a full picture of our nation's diversity, so the team is limited to a frustratingly simple disaggregation of the biggest set of estimates that we just saw. Nevertheless, the people I have worked with most closely on the DA team Shout out to Larry Sink, Eric Jensen, and Heather King. These people and the whole team have made substantial effort to expand the detail where possible and carefully engage with the available complex data. This will be showcased in the experimental data series, which will be released later. I commend the whole DA team for their professionalism, their transparency, curiosity, and energy during this entire process. Congratulations, everyone, on reaching this milestone. And I'll pass it on to Jeff Passell.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to the Census Bureau. I started my career as a demographer in a previous millennium. In 1974, I started at the Census Bureau, where I worked on demographic analysis, among other things, for the next 15 years. The puzzles facing demographic analysis have changed over the years as researchers have found solutions and uncovered new issues to ponder and investigate. For assessing the 1970 census, a major issue was how the completeness of birth registration had changed over the previous 35 years. For 1980, measuring immigration and its components came to the fore really for the first time. For more recent censuses, not only has accurate measurement of immigration remained at the center of demographic analysis, but other important issues have emerged, such as the racial classification of the population and the demographic components. My role for the 2020 census, and similarly for 2010, has been to serve as an advisor and sounding board to the outstanding demographic analysis research group at the Census Bureau, but with a particular focus on the immigration component. The DA team this decade has developed a brand new method for dealing with immigration that seems to be less prone to measurement and definitional problems, in that they no longer have to tediously reconstruct the demographic history of immigration for the past 75 years, nor do they have to separately assess immigration by what we call immigration type or status, that is, legal permanent immigration, temporary migration, and unauthorized immigration. By combining them, they've eliminated some of the definitional and measurement problems. Demographic analysis continues to be the foundation of the Bureau's evaluation program. Not only does it provide input to the post-enumeration survey, but it places the census results firmly in the context of the country's contemporary demographic situation and does so in a very timely manner. Moreover, demographic analysis provides a way to measure the quality of the 2020 census on a consistent scale with the previous 8 censuses going back to 1940. It's been a fascinating journey. Kudos to the demographic analysis staff for the excellent work they've done, and we're now all looking forward to the results from the 2020 census itself to compare to demographic analysis. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth Arias. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to thank and congratulate the demographic analysis team for their accomplishment. I was honored to be invited to provide feedback on the methodology used to estimate the death component of the demographic analysis. As a demographer with 20 years of experience working in the subfield of mortality, with a special focus on mortality data quality, I found the methodology the demographic analysis team employed to estimate deaths very sound and appropriate. The team graciously sought my advice and was receptive to my suggestions that special attention be given to specific mortality data quality issues. I was impressed with the team's development and application of innovative techniques to address some of the limitations of vital statistics mortality data. I also found the methods developed to estimate the other components of the demographic analysis of high quality, grounded in depth and expert understanding of demographic data and methods. I saw firsthand the demographic analysis process I had only read about in the past and witnessed the team's skill, dedication to excellence, and respect for the importance of data quality. And as an added benefit, I learned about new methods that I'm certain will help me in my own research. Overall, my experience as an advisor on this project was highly rewarding. I feel privileged to have been given the opportunity to participate in this process. The demographic analysis is critically important for the assessment of the quality of the decennial census. As an independent estimate of the April 1st, 2020 U.S. population, it is an invaluable resource for the ascertainment of the accuracy of the decennial census population count. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this very important process. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Liebler, Dr. Purcell, and Dr. Arias. As you heard from our speakers today, our goal is to produce a complete and accurate 2020 census. Demographic analysis is a key indicator that will be used to compare to 2020 census results to evaluate the quality of the census. While these estimates are different from the 2020 census results, will be released later, they are an important quality measure for the 2020 census. Before we open the phone lines to accredited media to ask questions, I'd like to invite everyone, if you haven't already, I know that we've had some people that have logged on during the actual news conference, and we're up to more than 700 callers that are listening today. I'd like to invite everyone to visit census.gov and take a look at our news release, or remind them they can look at our news release and electronic press kits there. And we are working to post later today tables on census.gov. I'll make sure and let you know during this press conference when and if they actually post. Online, you'll find our latest information on the 2020 demographic analysis, as well as on other surveys and census programs. Dr. Velkoff, Jensen, Liebler, Purcell, Arias, and Karen Battle are now available to take the questions on today's release. So please note, we're not taking any questions on pending litigation or the release of 2020 census data. And another reminder, if you press star 1 to ask a question, please remember to state your name and organization. Operator, I'm ready for the first caller.
Thank you. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your phone and record your name clearly. If you choose to withdraw your question, please press star 2. Again, to ask a question, please press star 1. It will take a few moments for the questions to come through. Please stand by.
And I've got a quick update as well. It looks like we are still working on posting the release, so just want to ask you to bear with us. We're getting the release and the data tables up as quick as we can. And if you do have questions that aren't able to be asked today, I'll remind you that you can always reach out to the Public Information Office at PIO@census.gov for any follow-up questions that aren't asked today or that you don't get a chance to actually ask today. Operator, do we have our first caller?
The first question comes from Adrian Sanz with the Associated Press. Your line is open.
Hi, Adrian.
Hello. Thanks for providing all this information. I just want to get a sense of why the average American would be interested in the release of this demographic analysis data. Kind of, give the essence of it and why, it's important for them to know that this type of data is out there.
Thanks for that line of question. I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Jensen, but then open it up for any of our other speakers to respond if they so choose. Eric?
Yeah, thank you. So why is the demographic analysis interesting to the average person? Well, demographic analysis is a very important evaluation of the quality of the decennial census. So these estimates will be used to estimate net coverage error. Also, demographic analysis are used as inputs into our other coverage measure, the post-enumeration survey. And finally, demographic analysis are used for planning for the next census.
Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the population estimates, have you been able to assess whether there's been an increase or decrease from previous demographic analysis data, and is that available at all in terms of the population estimate?
So we're not releasing today comparisons between, say, the 2010 demographic analysis, but we have seen an increase in the size of the population, which is what we would expect over 10 years of demographic change between births and deaths and international migration that's occurred since that time. We have our 2010 demographic analysis results available on our website, and we'll also today have our 2020 results available. But we're not releasing anything that shows that change. We do have the data visualization that you can see some changes from 2000 to 2010 to 2020.
Thank you for those questions. And as our operator is getting our next caller on the line, I just want to let everyone know that the release is now up, as well as the presentation on census.gov. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question comes from Hansi Wong with NPR. Your line is open.
Hi, Hansi.
Hi, Michael. My question is about how has COVID-19, the pandemic, and the deaths related to COVID-19, how has that complicated the work of the demographic analysis team in compiling these results?
Thank you for that question, Hansi, and I'm going to pass that back over to our DA expert, Dr. Jensen.
So the 2020 demographic analysis estimates include deaths from COVID-19. When we produce those estimates, we use monthly death totals from the National Center for Health Statistics. We had monthly death totals for January to March 2020. At that point, we were still early in the pandemic, so there weren't a lot of COVID deaths relative to what we've seen later in the year. But we did include COVID deaths in our estimates. And that was something that was an additional process we had to do different than what we would have done, in 2010 or before. So there was additional work there, but we're able to include those deaths.
If I can ask a quick follow-up, if there is any known discrepancies in those death records from January through March, given just there was a lot of confusion earlier in the year, and would that require an update of any of these estimates if any discrepancy is found ultimately in the death records?
If we do a large discrepancy in the death records, we could revisit, like with our experimental series. We did produce a range of estimates, low, middle, and high, to account for uncertainty in the data and methods. And so we're hoping that any discrepancies would be picked up in the range.
Thanks for that line of questions, Hansi. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question comes from Michael Maganon with CQ Roll Call. Your line is open.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Well.
I was hoping that someone might be able to talk a little bit about to what extent and how the DA estimates are used internally in checking census results. Obviously you've said that you're producing these separate from the census, and also you're going to be producing those net coverage estimates after the fact. I was hoping somebody could talk a little bit about to what extent they're used as an internal check on the results before they're released.
I'll again turn it over to our DA expert, Dr. Jensen, to talk about the quality checks and how the demographic analysis is used internally. Eric?
Yes. Yeah, so the demographic analysis estimates are not used in any way with the 2020 census results before they're released. Demographic analysis is independent of the census. And that's really important because we're basically a benchmark for the census, and so we need to be independent. That's why we're releasing the estimates today before the census results come out to show that they are independent. The DA estimates are used internally after the census comes out in planning for the next census. A good example of this was in 2010, the DA estimate showed a large undercount for young children aged 0 to 4. And so this prompted the Census Bureau to do a lot of research over the decade and to actually change some stuff on the form and in training and other ways to improve the count for young children in 2020. But there was no, so that's how we use it internally, mostly to prepare for the next census.
Thanks for that, Eric. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question comes from Christine Martinez Garcia with Latino Public Magazine. Your line is open.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
My first question, the undercounts of Hispanic and Latino communities were projected to have persisted in the census, especially for Hispanic children, in light of the lingering fear over the citizenship question, that is, which was proposed by the Trump administration. And do you believe that the distrust from some Latino families and immigrants affected your analysis or your overall numbers?
This is Michael Cook. I'll let Eric Jensen, Dr. Jensen, our expert, speak to that. But just a reminder to you and to everyone listening that these population estimates are population estimates. They're not an actual count. So I'll let Eric speak to that.
So to create our demographic analysis estimates, we use administrative records, mostly birth and death records. And for the Hispanic population, a lot of the estimate comes from our international migration components. These data they're available to us. We don't have to go collect data. And so any changes that happened during data collection, that wouldn't affect how we did the demographic analysis estimates.
Okay. May I also ask you that many local communities include Hispanic Latinos as part of the white race. How can folks, especially in this population, which there's been some concern from a lot of Hispanic and Latinos, how can they be better recognized as contributors to the overall population as far as being counted?
Right, and for a long time, demographic analysis estimates were limited to two broad race groups, Black and non-Black, and this is because of what's available in the historical vital records. In 2010, for the first time, the Census Bureau produced the demographic analysis estimates for the Hispanic population. And we can only do that for the Hispanic population born after 1990. So in 2010, it was the population 0 to 19. In 2020, we were able to expand that to the population 0 to 29. And with our experimental estimates, we're going to expand that even more, 0 to 39. And this is important because it lets us understand even more about the quality of the census counts for the Hispanic population.
Thank you for those lines of questions. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question comes from Janet Abney with Wall Street. Your line is open.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. Just to follow up on Hanji's question, do you have death estimates by month from COVID-19 by month for January, February, and March? You said that, that to the extent COVID deaths are represented in these figures, that they would be just for those months. I'm wondering, can you give us specific monthly estimates, particularly for January and March, when there was a sense that the virus wasn't necessarily here, but later reporting has showed that it was probably here earlier than people thought?
This is Michael. I'll pass that again over to Dr. Jensen just to talk a little bit about our administrative records and specifically those dealing with death records. Eric?
Okay, so we produce estimates as of April 1st, 2020, so we don't break them out by month or by year. But to talk about the death estimates, so what we did to create our death component is we use the monthly totals that are released by the National Center for Health Statistics. Those are available on the website for the National Center for Health Statistics, so I'd encourage you to go look there at those numbers. We don't look at specific types of death, so we just have the total deaths. And so it seems like you're asking if deaths were misclassified, would we pick that up? But we would have all deaths. And so if we saw an increase because of COVID deaths or because of other types of deaths, we would have picked up that increase because of the type of monthly totals data we are using.
Thanks for that. Operator, do we have our next caller?
The next question comes from Gabrielle Banks with Houston Chronicle. Your line is open.
Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi, Michael. I have a question about the fact that this count, the DA, ends, I think if I understand correctly, ends in April, and that this other census is mostly going to begin in April. And obviously the world changed dramatically in that time. So I'm wondering if it's apples to oranges because the U.S. population saw a dramatic death toll.
I'll let Eric give some sound to that, but just a quick reminder to you and all the other reporters on the line, the demographic analysis is an estimate of those living in the United States as of April 1st, 2020. And on the 2020 census, when people complete and respond to the 2020 census, they are filling out and responding using April 1st, 2020 as a snapshot, if you will, a reference date for what their household looked like on that same day. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric if he has anything else to add. Dr. Jensen?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add there. Just that our estimates are as of April 1st. Our goal is to estimate the U.S. population as of April 1st, 2020, which is also the reference date for the census. And so everyone who completed it after that date, it was asking them to list the characteristics and the number of people in their household on April 1st, 2020.
I have a quick follow-up. If you could tell us what you think are the key findings in the DA so that we can look them up ourselves. Like what would you point to as the key changes in the U.S. population?
So some of the key changes, we continue to see that the U.S. population gets older. We mentioned that when we talked about the population pyramid, so it's a rectangular shape, meaning that it's an aging population. We also see that the percentage Hispanic for the population 0 to 29 is higher than what we saw in 2010 and other times. So that's a key finding. Really, the key findings of demographic analysis come when we're able to compare them to the census counts, because that's ultimately what DA is. It's an evaluation of the quality of the census. So once the census counts are available to us, we'll be able to compare those and calculate net coverage error, and then we'll be able to release those estimates of net coverage error, which is really, again, the most important part of demographic analysis is what it tells us about the quality of the decennial census.
Thanks for that. Operator, can we have our next caller?
The next call is from Maria Pena with Telemundo. Your line is open.
Hi, Maria.
Yes. Thank you for doing this call. Without having the benefit of looking at the actual data, can someone give us a little more detail about how international immigration, affected the data analysis? In other words, what percentage did it contribute to in terms of an increase in the U.S. population and so forth? I mean, it's really hard to come up with a question when not looking at the data yet, but thank you for doing this.
Thank you for that line of question. And again, I'll turn that question about immigration administrative records over to Dr. Jensen.
Yeah, so immigration is a really important part of the demographic analysis estimates. We've talked a lot today about the birth records, how they're the foundation of demographic analysis, which they are. But international migration is really important because it's the population who's not in the birth records. And so we really need to get that right. Our method for 2020 of estimating the foreign-born population is quite different from what we've done in the past. In the past, we've basically tried to piece together annual time series of migration flows, and that's really difficult. But for 2020, we kind of have a revised method, and Jeff Bassell talked about that earlier in his remarks. Immigration is still hard, and so it really, when we talk about our range of estimates, our low, middle, high, a lot of that variation is coming from the international migration components. So I can't speak right now about how much change there was from international migration. We know that for some ages, international migration contributes a lot more to the estimate than other ages, and that's just kind of the patterns that we see in the age structure of immigrants. But international migration is a really important component, and especially if we want to get the estimates right, it's really hard because there's so much uncertainty that can be in those estimates.
Thanks for that. Operator, do we have any more callers?
There are no further questions in the queue.
Great. I'd like to thank everyone for their questions. And now I'd like to turn it over to Karen Battle, our Division Chief in the Population Division. She has a couple of words to share with us today.
Thank you, Mike. As you all have heard today, the Census Bureau has used demographic analysis every 10 years since 1960 to estimate the size of the nation's population. And certainly this process leverages the knowledge and skills of Census Bureau staff, but it also reflects the commitment of our staff to the Census Bureau's mission, which is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people. We know that the 2020 census data will be used for apportioning the U.S. House of Representatives. We know that it will be used to inform how funding is allocated across states, making resources available to neighborhoods, providing assistance to communities struggling in the aftermath of disasters, making a major impact on transportation, education, and public health. We know that the 2020 census data will serve as the basis for countless decisions, such as where to build new roads, place new schools, and open hospitals. We also know that the American people depend on us for quality data to make these plans and decisions and to make sure their needs are represented. Demographic analysis is one way that the Census Bureau shows that we take that responsibility very seriously, that we are committed to transparency, and that we hold ourselves accountable for our results. And in a year that has been rife with challenges and a 2020 census that faced unprecedented obstacles, this dedication and determination of Census Bureau staff has been more important than ever. Over the coming weeks, the tabulation of the 2020 census results will be completed and will begin a new phase, examining those results and exploring what the 2020 demographic analysis estimates can tell us about how well we counted the population. We will effectively kick off a decade of analysis to assess what worked and what didn't work, using that information to lay the foundation for the best 2030 census possible. And by releasing these 2020 demographic analysis estimates for the nation by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, we are also opening the door for researchers and the public to come to their own conclusions. We look forward to hearing those conclusions and to sharing our own results with you. We also look forward to continuing the conversation on demographic analysis with you in the coming years and to continue to provide you with our population estimates, statistics that many of you have covered in the past that provide a portrait of our changing demographics throughout the country every year. So thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Karen. And in closing, I'd like to thank our speakers, all of our speakers, for making themselves available today. As a reminder, please visit census.gov to access more details on the 2020 demographic analysis, plus other information on our other 130-plus Census Bureau surveys and programs, including our new American Community Survey 5-year estimates released last week. If you have any questions you weren't able to ask today, please reach out to the Public Information Office at 301-763-3030 or send an email to pio@census.gov. This concludes today's conference call. This is Michael Cook from the Public Information Office. Thanks, everyone.